This podcast is an addition to a Metal Gear Solid video I made. I often go off on tangents in my videos and start talking about things that are relative to what I'm talking about, but at the same time they're almost a little too removed from the game that I'm focusing on. And when I started this podcast series, I did it for two reasons. The first reason was that I can quickly record some audio and upload it, and not have to worry about spending long amounts of time collecting game footage and other sorts of video content. And the second reason is that often I find in my videos there are a lot of things I want to talk about that I just don't have time to fit into the video, and that's what makes podcasts perfect for anything that has spilled over that I didn't get a chance to cover. In this podcast, however, I'm going to be talking about the question of whether games are art. And for that reason, I'm going to have to actually use some graphics. Usually in my podcasts, I'll just have a video looping, or sometimes I'll not even have anything to look at really. But in this case, I'm actually talking about artwork. Some of this artwork you may have never seen before, some of it you may have heard of. I think that at least some of the things I'm going to be talking about you'll not have seen before. So rather than having to pause the podcast and then go off and look up an image of what I'm actually talking about, I'm going to put an image of what I'm talking about on screen to save you the trouble of actually having to do that. So with that short introduction, let's get on with the podcast. So like I said, this video is coming off the back of a Metal Gear Solid 1 video I made. Metal Gear is always synonymous with the question of whether games are art or not, so I talk a little bit about that in the video, but in this video I really want to nail down some of the finer details and points. The question of whether games are art or can be art has always puzzled me. I've never understood why it's even a debate. Just to let you know where I stand on this topic, yes, some games can be art. But that's not the interesting thing about this video. What I'm actually going to show you is why games can be art, or in fact why anything can be art. But I can't do that unless I first talk about a little bit of history of art. So I'm going to go into some other artists' work and show you a very small snippet of the history of art really, and really the birth of conceptual art. And that all started with an artist called Marcel Duchamp. His work focused on what art is and what art can be. He was the first artist to create a pastiche of the Mona Lisa. He basically took a small reproduction postcard of the Mona Lisa and drew a moustache on it. And what he was doing with that was he was actually, it was an attack on high art or fine art. And what he was doing was he was saying that why is there a difference between artwork that's hung in a museum or in a gallery and the artwork that's, say, graffitied along the side of a bus, for example. I mean, obviously you didn't have buses back then, but whatever the equivalent was. His vision was that anything can be art, and that there is already so much beauty in the world that you could essentially take something that's already been made and submit that as art, and that there's already so much beauty in the world that we almost don't even need art. In 1917, Duchamp entered a art competition with a piece that he called Fountain. Basically what he did was he took a urinal and set it on its side, signed it and submitted that as artwork. This was a porcelain urinal, so in some respects it's probably not a million miles different to some of the sculptural pieces that would have been created by potters. He created many of these, as he called them, ready-made artworks, where he would just take a bunch of things like a bicycle wheel and put it onto something, and that would just be art. But this was really the birth of conceptual art, where the artwork itself isn't as important as the concept. At this point in the video, you're probably going to see the analogy I'm drawing here, that if a toilet bowl set on its side can be artwork, then why can't a video game be artwork? Now, I'm not saying that you should run out and find your nearest men's room and rip the urinals off the wall and set them on your mantelpiece, But equally, I'm not saying that every game should be set on a pedestal and called fine art, because it's simply not the case. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the podcast when I talk about the artist Michael Craig Martin. But in chronological order, the next artist I want to talk about is Magritte. This oil painting is called The Treachery of Images. It was painted in 1928 by Rene Magritte. On the painting are the words "Sose no pez in pipe," and that translates to "This is not a pipe." And that's because it's not a pipe, it's a painting of a pipe. Magritte is doing what every artist does and every piece of art does. It takes something from the everyday world and transports it into something that didn't exist before it. But he's taken it one step further by actually writing on the piece of artwork, explaining further that it's not the original object it once was. It's merely an image of the pipe, it's not the pipe itself. Another artist that took everyday objects and turned them into artwork was Andy Warhol, perhaps most famous for his Campbell's soup tin. People who doubt whether games are art may also say, how can a tin of soup be art? And the answer is that it's not the artwork. The artwork is the image that Warhol screen printed. And just like Magritte's oil painting is not a pipe, Andy Warhol's screen prints are not soup tins. While we're talking about Andy Warhol, there's a fun little fact I know about him. If you've ever heard the phrase, everyone will have their 15 minutes of fame, he actually coined that phrase. But later when he was interviewed by a reporter and asked about it, he said, no, I want to actually change that to, in 15 minutes, everyone will be famous. Now, bearing in mind that he said this in the 80s, I think he was right in some respects. When we have Celebrity Big Brother and these other reality TV shows, Facebook, YouTube, everyone's sort of out there and anyone can be famous. Warhol also, like Duchamp, printed the Mona Lisa. He printed it 30 times and called it 30 are better than one. But the last artist I want to talk about is actually quite similar to Warhol. His name is Michael Craig Martin. I first discovered Michael Craig Martin through his series of everyday objects that's very pop art, a lot like some of the Andy Warhol prints I'd seen before, but actually almost more simplified, which I quite like. But I don't want to talk about Michael Craig Martin's colourful paintings. What I actually want to talk about is a installation piece he created called Oak Tree. In my opinion, with Oak Tree, Michael Craig Martin did something slightly different to Warhol, Magritte and Duchamp. Oak Tree is literally a glass set onto a glass shelf. There is a sheet on the side of the wall beside the installation which has questions asked to Michael Craig Martin and his answers. Questions like, could you describe this work? And his answers were, what I have done is I've taken a glass of water and turned it into a fully grown oak tree without altering the ingredients of the glass of water. And other questions like, it looks like a glass of water, to which he answers, of course it does, I didn't change its appearance, but it's not a glass of water, it's an oak tree. Another question was, have you simply called a glass of water an oak tree? To which he answers, absolutely not, it's not a glass of water anymore. I have changed its actual substance. It would no longer be accurate to call it a glass of water. I'll be honest, I was a little baffled when I first came across this piece of artwork, and if you've never heard of it, maybe you are too. There's nothing in the questions and answers that actually gives away what this artwork's about. But one critique of the artwork actually reveals that this piece of artwork is about the transubstantiation. That is the sacrament called the Eucharist, which the Catholic Church uses. And if you're unfamiliar with the Catholic Church, the Eucharist is a ceremony which they literally believe that a cracker and some sweet wine turns into the flesh and the blood of a carpenter that died over 2,000 years ago. In the ceremony, the participants then eat this flesh and blood, kind of like vampires, I guess, and zombies. I think what Michael Craig Martin was essentially doing with this piece of artwork was saying that if you're going to tell me that a cracker can do the things that you believe, then I can take anything and turn it into absolutely anything. And so the thing that is important here is not the piece of artwork, it's not the glass on the shelf, but the message that Michael Craig Martin is conveying in this piece of artwork. So the concept is more important than the actual piece of artwork itself, and that's conceptual art, and that's what, if you're ever confused of why a shark's in a tank of formaldehyde, for example, then it's because there is a concept behind that, and it's not the actual artwork you're really looking at. Which brings us to the question of whether games are art. You have seen that a glass of water can be art, a toilet bowl can be art, someone else's art can be art. But with artwork, you really have to judge each case on its merits. It doesn't mean that every glass of water is art, or that every toilet bowl is art, or that every video game is art. But the games that convey messages and say things about the world around us are art. And anyone that says differently is just being a snob. So that's my thoughts on whether games are art, and I'd love to hear what you guys think. Maybe you have a different take on it, or you have something else to add. I would love to hear what everyone else thinks about this topic. So for now, thanks for watching, and I hope you got a chance to watch the Metal Gear Solid video that this podcast is referring to.